Now, our next teller is Debb Freedman. She is one of the founders of Moose. She has recently produced 3 books, which I think are available over there tonight. They are part of a series called The Quiet Triumph of the Heart. And whether Debb is telling us about moments that she's had here in Portland, about the AIDS quilt that she was very much a part of, touring around for 12 years from 1988 to 2000, or whether she's making up one of her famous fairy tales that she does for special occasions, she always goes right to the heart.
Bobby lived in a small town in Maine for most of her adult life. She married. She had 6 children, she divorced, and waitressed to earn money. Simple life. And then one day her son comes to her and tells her that he is infected with AIDS. And he wants to work with the quilt. And she looked at him and said, "Me too." She had one of those big honkin' caddies from back in the 50s. She hated to drive it, so I would drive it. But the trunk was absolutely fabulous and fit all the duffel bags that we kept the quilt in. So she would be my navigator, and off we would go in her old caddy up to Madawaska, Rumford, Presque Isle. And she always paid for the gas, and we always used full service. One of the places that we went to was Harmony Elementary School. They wanted the quilt, and we put it down on the floor to these 2nd, 3rd, and 4th graders. And when they're that little, I just naturally said, well, you know, these are people who died from AIDS, and they were loved. And I would go over all the symbols that they could tell that they were loved. And I said, well, this one was made for Mike, this one was made for John, and this one was made for Paul. And one kid pipes up, "I know Paul." So, "You do?" "Yeah, Paul Bunyan." Oh, okay. What do we do with this? Paul Bunyan lived in the woods, and he had a blue ox named Babe, and they would spend all their days traveling together. Well, these kids knew Paul Bunyan's stories, so one by one, they start. Well, Paul Bunyan was in the woods with his blue ox named Babe, and it would start to snow, and another one would go, and it snowed, and it snowed, and snowed, and it snowed, and it snowed, and they needed to get warm. So Paul Bunyan took some pine branches and then took his axe and cut a piece of bark, and Babe took her hoof and made a hole in the bark, and Paul Bunyan took some of Babe's hair from her tail and threaded the bark, and they stitched all the pine boughs together and made a quilt. Now that was back in the 90s, the early 90s. 20 years have passed, and I bet you that those kids, when they hear a Paul Bunyan story, they're going to think of the quilt. Time passed.
It was a long, short time. It was a long time.
And Bobby had traveled with the quilt with me for many years, and her health was getting poor. And one day, I got a phone call from her son, who is still living, that she had passed. And he said to me, "Deb, could you come to her memorial service and, do what you do?" And I said, "Sure." And he meant the fairy tales. So, memorial service, I go in, preacher's in the front of the room, and he's talking about heaven and hell and judgment day, and he made the mistake of asking, does anybody else have something to say? Once upon a time, a long, long time ago, in a place far, far away, there was born a fairy. And she was all silver. She had silver hair and silver eyes and silver eyebrows and silver nails, and she just glistened. No wings. She would walk on the forest floor, and she would look up and see all those fairies going fast and flying, and her heart would just yearn to fly with them. Just wasn't to be. She would try, she would get onto a flower and climb up to the top, and only when she reached the top, the flower would bend, and she was back on the floor. Well, okay, so she was going to have fun with the beetles and the spiders and the worms and the snakes, and would often get rides into the meadow out of the woods, and she would sit on stones, and they would glisten because she was there. And you know, people would come by and pick up the stone that she was on and put it in their pocket when they got home. Oh, it was just dull and ordinary. She had long hopped off. And she was known as the Fairy of the Stones. And she would sit and she would talk to anybody who came by. But in her heart, she would just watch those fairies and go, oh, they're going so fast and they're flying. And then settle back down to her life. Well, one day, a caterpillar came by. And he looked at her and he said, oh, I just want to fly. I want to go fast. I wish I had wings and I want to fly. You too? Me too. But it's just a dream. Yeah, it's just a dream. I'm tired of that old dream. I'm going to go to sleep. So she really cared for him, and she crocheted him a green afghan with gold flecks. And off he went. Well, time passed.
It was a
Short time. It was a long time.
And she heard her name. Bobby, oh Bobby. And she's looking, it sounded like caterpillar. She's looking on the ground. Doesn't see him at all. Bobby, Bobby, up here. And she looks up. He has wings, and he's going fast. Bobby, I have an extra pair just for you. Well, time passed.
It was a short time.
It was a long time.
And I had put together a one-woman Peter Pan. I did. And I was going to try it out at Gino's, which is a punk rock place right behind my house. They have a sweet little stage. And they said, fine. So I went in to give them a poster for Peter Pan. And I hear, Debb Freedman. And I look. There's a young man sitting at the bar with a beard and piercings and some tattoos. Caleb? Is that you? Hey, Debb, you told the sweetest story at my grandma's memorial service. And I hopped on a seat, and we talked about his grandma, Bobby. La-la-dee-da, la-la-dee-da, la-la-la-la-la.
Mm.